Thank you very much all the teaching staff and professors here in the school. As Mateusz has explained, we have been working for almost 18 years. So we were young when we first met in 2008, and I'm happy to be here again. This afternoon, I will deliver a lecture talking about one of the largest urban projects in Barcelona that has been running for 20 years. And in these 20 years, we have learned many lessons that now we are taking into consideration to look at the future and to recast the mastering of the project. So basically, what I want to explain is that this is a very important area in the city. It's quite large for a relatively small city in terms of surface. That has a strong tradition. It was the core for manufacturing production during the 19th century, and now is trying to become the new heart, the new economic heart for the city. But a lot of controversial issues are in the middle. We're going to learn that this transformation process is a kind of saga of different regeneration areas. I mean, we have the tradition in Barcelona to regenerate the industrial and manufacturing areas that has started just before the Olympic Games. And we are going to look how the future looks like after considering all the lessons, all the learning we have during these 20 years the project has been running on. As you know, Barcelona is kind of complex urban system. It's a polycentric structure that comprises more or less 3,000 square kilometers, where almost 5 million people live. So it will be like 5 times Krakow in size of population, but much larger because inside we have forests, we have natural parks, we have areas for growing cultures, such as vineyards, so it's a quite complex. But the main central city is what is really well known in the world, basically because it's a compact area where diversity of land uses, where social mixtures is occurring, and at the same time it has a compactness that allows basically people to walk. 85% of mobility is solved by walking. I mean, most of people walk because they have shops, they have schools, they have offices, all together packing in these 60 square kilometers, which is the center of the city. The city, of course, is quite touristic. This is an asset, but at the same time it's a challenge for urban compatibility with other people. It has been for centuries a hub for creation of art, both in the architectural, but also in other arts. So basically the main artistic movements, the Art Nouveau, the modernism we call, took place in the city because of the richness and the burghers working with industry and the money going from one hand to the other produce or allow to have this kind of creations. Contemporary architecture is also important in city, and the city council is very well aware of what exactly is being permitted in the city. There is a quality board that allows or not the production of new premises. So it is not only about the past, but also the present architecture. But Barcelona is basically known in the urban realm because of the huge transformation it occurred almost 25 years ago during the Olympic transformation that comprises basically all the central municipality producing new connection systems, new sportive areas, opening the city to the sea, and basically transforming a great Barcelona we have inherited from the dictatorship area. I mean, before 1975, were overcrowded and poor center and suburbs that were quite disconnected from the city center and producing a spectacular change, removing slums, opening the city to the sea, and creating basically new spaces. And everything packaged in 6 years. So the city was impressively transformed in just 6 years with the efforts of architects, urban planners, and funding coming from the European Union, the state, the central state, I mean Spain, and of course the city council credits and the public-private partnership. So this is the basic core of the success of transforming the city just in 6 years. Barcelona received for the first time in history the award of the Royal Institution of British Architects, because normally this award was granted to architects, but for the first time it was granted to a city. I mean, not only individual works, but collective, integrate works, so the city became quite popular in urban terms. But this regeneration that occurred during the Olympic Games went beyond. I mean, during the Olympic transformation, talking just about the waterfront, comprised the transformation of the old port into a leisure port, the opening of all this industrial area and producing the Olympic Village, I mean, creating super blocks, accommodating housing here, also a new port for sportive activities, new green space along the beach, and complementing, let's go to say, the fabrics. Introducing also research in the very front of the sea, and introducing new activities that some years after became important. The regeneration continued. I mean, the ideas you see are really small areas of transformation that go from the center through the river, and producing new housing, this idea of mixture of land uses. We can see hotels, shops with these new blocks containing inside the yards used by city residents. And again, the recovery of public space, for example, by opening the Diagonal Avenue for the Cerda plan, that you know that is the main layout of the city from the middle of the 19th century. The Diagonal Avenue, which is one of the 3 very important urban, this is one, the Meridiana is the other, and here we have the Parallel and the Gran Via, was not open until 1996. So in this area of regeneration, the idea was to create a new Diagonal Avenue with a central, let's go to say, green space, like kind of linear park. And all this huge opening was self-funded by selling the plots that were together. So the public money was not used to produce the ending of the Diagonal Avenue. Introducing, of course, new transportation systems that have been abandoned before, and creating new spaces for culture, greenery, of course, in a city that requires such kind of facilities, protect from heat waves, and producing new clusters for offices and culture. The transformation continued in 2002 with the arrival of the high-speed train. High-speed train in Spain comes from 1992, joining Madrid with Seville, where the expo happened at the same time that the Olympic Games in Barcelona. So 1992 was an important year for Spain, 2 international events occurring, one in the north, the other in the south. But the connection between Madrid and Barcelona occurring this year, so they decide to build a complete new train station, especially the boat for this transportation system, along this manufacturing area, which is La Sagrera. So the idea is to put all the railway underground and to alleviate this space, creating a linear park, connecting basically the only central park we have in Barcelona, which is quite small, but quite accessible from the city, with, let's go to say, the river, which is over there, going through this sign. So this is the main idea for this Sagrera train station that is now still under construction because it's a huge, it's a pharaonic investment. Perhaps one of the failed projects we have in city is the Forum of Cultures. Since the 19th century, in Barcelona have took place two international fairs, one at the very end of the 19th century, the other in 1930. So the transformation of the city has always been linked with these international events since the 19th century. I mean, this Central Park, as I was explaining, was the venue for the first international fair. So the Olympic Games, again, allow the city to be transformed. So the city created a new international event. It was called the Forum of Cultures. Basically, it was gathering different cultures from the world, celebrating diversity, the languages, and different ethnic features. So they took advantage of creating this event to transform the last part of the waterfront, where three main facilities were located. One was the sewage treatment plant that was here, the energy production plant, and the peripheric that was built during the Olympic Games. So it was a complicated project because having of these large infrastructures, so they decided to build a square that goes above the infrastructures. But this is a square without greenery, of course, without trees. It's kind of dry, hard. It's quite apart from the city, so the life never came as it was originally planned. Basically, it's, let's go to say, a derelict space. It's not a really success project. But the idea was nice because in this area of the city, we have a huge, large housing estate that was built to accommodate migrants coming from the remainder of Spain during the industrialization. And this area eventually became quite dangerous, or at least was perceived as quite dangerous. So what they decided to do is to transform not only the waterfront, but allowing to produce permeability through this state, this deprived social housing. Bringing to the area not only spaces for leisure, but also for culture, such as this building from Herzog and de Meuron, which is a museum, the Natural History Museum, or, for example, the Hadid building for my university that was never built because of the overpriced budget it implied. But the idea was to diversify the land uses. So we arrived to the very center of the regeneration area, the largest regeneration area, the 22 At. But what exactly the 22 At is? In order to answer this question, we have to go back 200 years. Just when Barcelona started to be the industrializing point in Spain. Before the Cerdà plan was designed, basically the city was constrained to the walls. Here, more or less, lived 200,000 people. But at the same time, of course, it was empty, was not allowed to build because it was the defensible area for the city. I mean, it was forbidden to build. So the small villages start to appear more or less like in 3 kilometers away from the walls. Sants here, you see Sarriá over there, Gracia here, and this, which was the new town, Poblenou, in San Andreu, where the Sagrera is. Barcelona started to transit from, let's go to say, a manual or handcraft textile industry that was quite well implemented to a manufacturing one. So basically, the coal was imported from England, arrived to the port of Barcelona, and fuel the new manufacturing plants that were being implemented here. Basically because two reasons. The first one, because it was forbidden to install steam engines inside the walls. They were quite dangerous. They explode. They were not quite enough well designed in terms of security. The second reason, because the land was very cheap. And the third reason, because it was water. I mean, kind of wetlands existed there. Eventually, this settling, colonizing of manufacturing plants in Barcelona, you can see 4 stories manufacturing plants, first for textile industries, and after for chemistry, for food production. I mean, it became diversified. So, the Poblenou, this area, was eventually transformed in what they call the Catalan Manchester. I mean, the main manufacturing cluster in Spain after Pyrenees in the Iberic Peninsula. By the 60s, the manufacturing area looked like this. You can see, for example, quite interesting, that where is the mouse? It's now here. You can see here. For example, here was the steam engine, and all these buildings that you can see here are not owned by the same manufacturing firm. I mean, the investors of the premise rent the space to small firms, and the firms rent the space, but at the same time they buy the mechanical force. So it was by a system of poleas, I don't know how to say it in English, the movement of the machine was transmitted between the buildings. So they rent the space and also the possibility to make the machinery move with this system. This is important because in Barcelona, in Catalonia, manufacturing plants were not large. I mean, they were coming from handcraft families, small enterprises. And they still are small. I mean, this is one of the features. I mean, it's not for corporations or not for huge firms. Of course, after the oil crisis from 73, 74, manufacturing in Spain started to migrate to other countries or even to the outskirts of the city. So the Catalan Manchester became to an end. Gradually it became derelict. Some new activities, for example, logistics or kind of warehouse appeared, and the district was dead. So the city council arrived to the conclusion it was necessary to produce a huge transformation. So the problem was that there was two confronting hypotheses how to transform this area. Was it convenient to expand the fabric of housing? At that time, housing was very scarce because people was arriving to the age of having their own home. I mean, the pyramid, the demographic pyramid was arriving to the age to migrate and to be independent from original families. So the demand for housing was huge. So by delivering housing in this very city center could be an opportunity to regenerate the area. The other hypothesis was to transform this economic core into a new economic core, more in line with the new activities that at that time, the end of the 20th century, were emerging. Basically related with innovation, basically related with new ICT technologies, basically related with financial information and delivering services, high added value services. Josep Acevillo was the head architect in Barcelona at that time. So he basically was on the side of the economic activity, and he convinced politicians to go by that way. So the 22A, which is the code for the urban planning for manufacturing, transformed into 22 at. with the idea, with this ad, that the new electronic, the new, let's go to say, dematerialized economy can land in city. So in order to transform the area, basically they follow an approach that was based in, of course, in urban planning, but also in an infrastructure plan and a management agency. So all three, let's go to say, pillars were required in order to produce this transformation. If we put the attention on the urban planning, we can learn that the master plan for Barcelona was transformed in these blue blocks, more or less 22 kilometers, which is quite large for a compact city. In these blocks, the new land use was only this 22 at. I mean, from that time on, housing was not allowed, basically. Manufacturing plants were not allowed, so only new activities were allowed and basically located in buildings like offices. So basically an office district. So the city council made an analysis of the pre-existences and the structure of property. So in the places where were more complicated, that the owners gathered together in order to foster the transformation of the area, the city council designed in detail the transformation. So in these red polygons you see here, they provide the directions of urban planning. I mean, so the urban planning consists in two things: to modify the general plan, but also to provide detailed zoning plan for certain problematic areas. Here you have more or less a perspective of what the 22 area is and the main figures. For example, at that time, all the floor space for offices in Barcelona, in the metropolitan area, was 4 million square meters. So the 22 at provide another 4 million. That means double the space for offices for these new activities, providing 100,000 new jobs. This is very important, because by providing new jobs, that means that you make Barcelona more important for the structuring of the metropolitan system. More people can come to work in Barcelona, especially because, as I have said previously, housing was not plenty allowed. So basically these people has to come from other parts of Barcelona or from the metropolitan area. So it implies to reinforce the centrality of a city that is already central. Of course, being a manufacturing area means that some services for people were completely absent, such as facilities or greenery. So the plan managed to provide those figures of both of the features and providing also public infrastructure. The only housing that was allowed in the area was the social housing, in a very small percentage. We are going to see after. And here you can see the activities that at that time they thought were land in the city. I mean, informatics, electronics, biomedics, the media, the video games industry that now is very important in Barcelona because of that. Now Barcelona has become into a hub in the production of video games in Europe, even in the world. And of course, the more traditional information activities such as data management and telecommunications. So here you can see how the teleplans look like 23 years ago. This is the Eix Llacuna, an important historic street, and of course detailing all the land uses and how the volumes of buildings should look like, with a strong opposition from local developers, and finally managing to produce more flattened schemes. In order to support the new activities, these new, let's go to say, new activities, it was necessary to produce a huge transformation of the public space but also to introduce state-of-the-art infrastructures. The problem was that most of the streets were not open at that time. I mean, the manufacturing plants were, let's go to say, occupying the space that was devoted in the Cerdà plan for streets. So one of the main issues to superate is to open these new streets, but also taking advantage of the creation of these new streets to provide, in some cases, pedestrian aids. It was necessary also to introduce, we can see here some of the pictures, to introduce new infrastructures, for example, to provide water, hot and cold, taking advantage from the garbage processing that we have next to the energy generation area. No? So with the burning of the garbage, it can be produced hot water in order to heat the buildings. I mean, this is quite common in Central Europe, but quite uncommon in Spain. Also for the cold water, in order to avoid to have chillers in each of the buildings and produce more efficiency by concentrating the infrastructures. Of course, it was necessary also to introduce optic fiber, but huge optic fiber. I mean, not the conventional one, but what they call the black one, that it has a wide segment. Introduce new greenery, taking into consideration the new trends, basically relate with the consideration of green areas as an ecosystem service. I mean, not only space for leisure for people, but also providing services to nature, to diversify the insects, birds, different animals that were already not present in the city, allowing to infiltrate all the raining water, which is small in Mediterranean areas, but very important to recover the underground water, and introduce all these novelties in the design of the public areas. And all this huge investment paid by privates. This is quite important. Public money has not been used in order to provide all this infrastructure. We're going to see how after. In order to attract new firms, in order to promote the new district, it was implement a public company, and that was not only making kind of marketing, city marketing of the area, but also speeding up the process of detailing planning and the management process. We're going to see what I refer to land management. Also to supervise the infrastructure provision and to manage all this huge transformation in a relatively small lapse of time. So how privates, I mean original landowners or developers, can afford such a huge quantity of money necessary to transform the city? In Spain, basically, we use the land readjustment. It consists of merging all the original plots and producing a new urban structure on the one hand, and allowing the landowners to be the owners of the development rights. In order to have these development rights, they have to pay for infrastructure and public space. So in that way, the public money is not used for creating new spaces. So it is necessary that there is a kind of feasibility analysis when the plans are approved. I mean an economical analysis, where the costs should be smaller than the benefits landowners or developers can extract from the area. So by analyzing this balance, I mean, how much does it cost to provide these new parks, these new infrastructure, these new public transport systems on the one hand, and on the other, how much is the increase of the land value because new land uses and new floor area ratios are allowed, we arrive to a conclusion if it is feasible to privates to transform the city. So privates have been in charge of providing these services, as I have said before, and in order to allow this feasibility, the analysis or the new land uses consisted of in this transformation. Originally, in the 22A, I mean in the industrial area, it was allowed to build 2 square meters of floor space by 1 square meter of land. So the floor area ratio was 2, only for manufacturing uses. So in the new plan, in the 22 At, it was possible to build this 8 floor area ratio for business and 22 At activities. Just by changing the land use and given this 0.7 square meters more of land build space, it was enough to pay off for the transformation costs. But the City Council decided also to have social housing. So 10% of the new floor area ratio was devoted for social housing. I mean, private housing was not allowed. Only was allowed in the industrial buildings. In order to foster, to incentivize developers to maintain these industrial buildings, private loft, which works much more in the market than the normal flats, were allowed. So in that way, developers have more economical incentives in order to invest in preserving the manufacturing plants. So basically here you have an analysis how a traditional, let's go to say, small warehouse can be transformed. Of course, don't pay a lot of attention of the numbers, but the main idea is that despite that landowners have to pay for the transformation, there is still a room for a gaining. I mean, the original value of the land, manufacturing land, is this. The final value of the land after transformation is this other. Both landowners have to pay for transformation costs on the one hand, but also have to share part of the gaining to the City Council. So the City Council is not only receiving streets, parks, new areas for facilities, but also receives part of the property rights. So the city becomes richer, all for free. And there is still room for private gaining, which is this area that you see here. And that's the reason because why in relatively small lapse of time, the 22 At has been enormously transformed. I mean, new offices, areas for studios to record videos and to create new, let's go to say, electronic leisure offices, traditional offices for finance, lawyers, engineers, architects. Video games, as I have explained before, have appeared, as you see, with a reasonable quality in terms of materiality, but also architectural design. The new firms has been installed here. Even the new trends go through more sustainable buildings. For example, this, that is recovered with wood in order to allow for a more, let's go to say, insulation and reduce the windows in order to allow for less heat gaining during the summer. The idea was so to produce these transformations of hotels, universities, art production centers have appeared. You can see the Pompeu Fabra, which is a public-private university that has raised in the international rankings, is for economics, basically was installed here, preserving some idea of the industrial path. Here you can see a cultural facility built again, preserving the chimney for the... So the area basically at the beginning was 100 private, not public space was present. At the end of the transformation, only 70% was private, and privates were obligated to donate for free the space for green areas, for social housing, and for facilities in the proportion you see here. This is the social housing appearing in the area. Just in 20 years, which is quite few for a city that has 2,000 years, is almost nothing. 4,000 new companies relate with this 22 economy have arrived. From this, almost 1,300 are knowledge intensive. I mean, they are adding a lot of value in the production chain. Basically, as you see, our medium or high medium technology manufacturing has appeared, and 50,000 new jobs has been created with this revenue for the economy each year. I mean, from that perspective, from the perspective of the original goal, we can say the project was a success, because only in 20 years it was producing or delivering the results they were expecting for. But of course, the city is not only to produce money or to deliver services or create products. It's also space that requires to be lived by people. And this area is not very livable. I mean, of course, the buildings maybe are fancy, but having only activities produce a district that is empty on weekends, or is basically derelict at night. So 5 years ago, they start a process to rethink the project, because only half of this was already built. The remainder was still pending. So they convey citizens, enterprises, the universities that were present there, and 1,000 people were participating in how the new 22 should look like. So they arrived at some conclusions. The first one was that it was necessary to maintain a given kind of manufacturing activities, basically those related with the craft, with almost artisanal activities produced in a very small scale, because by having these small workshops, it's possible to provide livable areas in the city, quite attractive, and not only for people buying the services or the product, but for people passing through the streets. Also, the manufacturing that was not allowed in the last plan, they arrived to the conclusion that it was necessary to introduce or reintroduce manufacturing, but related with the information. I mean, what they call the manufacturing 4.0. I mean, to allow workshops for this new kind of activities that are related. You cannot notice, is that a service? Is that manufacturing? Or is a hybrid of both of them? So 3D printing, and the remainder of activities. But also in Barcelona, since 6 years ago, a new mayor has been ruling the city. And this new mayor is not coming from, let's go to say, the dominant class of the city, but by the very popular basis. The idea of this mayor, Ada Colau, is to transform the economy of the city, not only allowing these high-tech, fancy companies to settle there, but also to manage the local people to produce economical activities through cooperatives, through different local associations. So the idea is to promote this social economy, which is quite related to the green economy. But also to foster something that was happening quite timid. I mean, the culture, the arts, the learning processes, and to expand the possibilities to create this area. But the main change is increase the quantity of housing. I mean, going from this 10% that I have explained before to 1/3 of all the new spaces. I mean, to create a more balanced district, not only for activities. And for such housing, at least 50% of the new social housing should be for rental. And this is very important for a country where basically people are owners. It's not, for example, like the Netherlands or maybe Germany, where there is a stock of the housing that is social. I mean, basically are owners for private homes. So by introducing the obligation that developers deliver social housing, private developers delivering social housing for rental, it is possible for young people that have small salaries to live in the district and not to migrate to other outskirts of the city where the housing is cheaper. Also, it was necessary to diversify the grounds. I mean, in the original buildings, as we can see here, the building arrives and in the ground is happening nothing. And it kills the city. I mean, when you have an office building that arrives to the very ground, the very basis, and nothing happens, it kills the city automatically. So they have transformed the regulation in order to diversify the land use mixture at the ground level and produce a more, let's go to say, interesting city. Increase, for example, activities that are related to the gender perspective. I mean, to ease basically women that take care of children, but also elderly people, their daily life, allowing that jobs and different services that are required for these cares are close to these new homes. To create a kind of civic axis, basically one we're going to see, and to transform some streets in green axis. We're going to see what exactly is that maybe is the main innovation in terms of public space. So basically the idea in the 22 Act is to completely remove the car traffic, each 3 blocks in one side and each other, to connect the beach areas with all the fabrics and the river on this area, and to produce completely pedestrian streets where the canopy is larger, contributing to reduce the head island effect. So the idea is that at least 70% of the surface is covered by this canopy during the summer, of course. In winter, those are trees that lost the leaves in order to allow to heat the buildings. And of course, here only pedestrians, bikes can access, as well as service trucks. In some cases, in these cases that are more central, to reinforce, as I have explained before, the uses for daily life. I mean, jobs that allows to go into the public space, cafeterias that can informally, more spontaneously go and occupy the public space. I mean, not quite very prescribed, the use of the public space. Areas where people can go for shopping, which is very traditional in Spain, with this trolley. They go and they bring the shopping and they give life to the streets. And this, that is the future, is already taking place. Here we can see how this new green axis looks like. No? Maybe it's not the best time to take the picture because, as you see, the trees still don't have the leaves. But here you can see how they manage to make compatible the bikes with the pedestrian areas. Also, obligating some of the public facilities to allow the bikes inside, welcoming the bikes. Biking in Spain is not a popular way of transportation, so they have to make also public policies in order to foster this. I think you are working on this plot in some of the studios. It's already built, but you can consider it's empty. The new public space, as you see, is not over-prescribed. That means that everything can happen here. I mean, there are not a specific space to play or to sit, but it is more or less the people can manage to do whatever they want according to the age of the year. And as you can see here, basically all the water that is that falls into the street goes here, and it becomes into a momentaneous lake. I mean, it's an area to absorb the water during the rainy season that is very short, and we have to take advantage of this time. Of course, there are areas for children that are designed in order that children carers can talk among them, and there is fences, so they don't have to put attention all time on children. They can have their own life and foster the quality of the convivency there. So here you have more images of this green area. But the idea of green axis is not only constrained in the 22 Act. It's running along the city. I mean, those green axes on the 22 Act will be connected with the green axis in the very heart of the city. Here we can see one of the central streets that has been transformed into a green axis. This is the opening of what they call the super block, but now it's not really the super block idea, but the green axis, where you can see that in the former traditional street, daily life is happening, and activities for children, and also people can gather and enjoy these new areas. Again, in a city where there are no parks. I mean, we are not talking of a city that has a lot of parks. We have just one, a city that is very dense. And because of that, people can walk and can have services at the reach of their home. But all this transformation that is happening just now is attracting a lot of scholars and a lot of city policy makers from all the world, is not exempt of criticism. Giuseppe Acevillo, the head architect for Barcelona, has took to the courts, to the mayor, because of the green axis. I mean, the mayor, which has this wonderful idea, has not followed all the steps required in the mastering of a new master plan, because by putting the cars away, not only one street, but a lot of the street, you are changing completely the structure of the mobility in the street. So you have to follow a process, which is in the law, in order to produce this transformation. And this process has not taken place. I mean, of course, there has been public participation, the participation of different stakeholders, but not the process that is written down in the law. So now, the city mayor is struggling to face justice in order to defend the idea of the green axis. Let's go to see what happens. By the time being, in the first instance, she is safe. But let's go to see what happens in the future, that you are very welcome to come to Barcelona and see how this new city is looking like. So thank you very much. Bardzo dziękuję.